It's pretty fitting that the chapter on general news starts out with election coverage as we are heading into the primary in California. This shot, taken by Oliver Dullieri, is an image of George Bush at a lecture podium. This was a scripted event that was about 100 people. It was at the end of his second term. And he captured the standard shots while covering this event that you would normally get where you could see the president's face. But he started looking around and he was looking for different angles. He waited for almost a half an hour at this spot to try and get this shot. Many political events are planned for the camera, and in that case, they're highly scripted and they can tend to make boring photos. But the hard part of this job is to look behind the scenes of what was planned for the cameras and find some unique moments that tell part of an unscripted story. The news often covers only the public persona of politicians on the campaign trail. That's pretty typical. But in 2009, Damian Winters broke the mold of traditional campaign trail photography when he started covering the Obama campaign for the New York Times. He ended up winning a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage. By avoiding the overstaged moments carefully planned, he gave the viewers unique looks behind the scenes at a national campaign that we had not seen before. This is a more typical shot that you would see in regular campaigns for general news assignments. Winters took his time and he mixed both traditional and non-traditional images to make his story visually compelling. Without even reading the caption for this story, it's pretty obvious this is a campaign event, correct? What visual clues do we as a class see when we look at this that tell us this is a campaign rally? Take a minute to think about that before we go to the next slide. But while he did get the traditional safe shots, Damian spent a lot of time going behind the scenes and getting real people. And that can be a challenge because campaigns are trying to control where the cameras are and what's happening. In the book, there's some tips about staying out of sight, out of mind, being quiet. Damian did that very well. He basically stayed out of sight, stayed out of mind, moved around where he wanted to. And this really allowed him to find some unique moments that the viewers could really relate to. A typical photojournalist more than likely would not have gotten into the food truck to get this shot. They would have taken the shot from outside with Obama surrounded by people. And because he did this, we get this moment that we wouldn't normally see, right? And you can see Obama's expression. You can kind of see with the framing of the people in the truck what he was working on. But he really did an excellent job of kind of mixing the traditional shots with behind-the-scenes shots to make a visually compelling story. And again, in the book, they talk about zip your lips and covering campaigns from the inside. When that access is given to you, you need to be wary that when people are campaigning and they're having behind-the-scenes meetings that you may be allowed to be in, there will be things that come up and there will be things discussed that they consider to have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So you need to bear that in mind. There's a few other tips. Don't use a flash in closed room meetings and, kind of stay out of the way. This image is an official press photo from the Obama administration. During his administration, they had a professional on-site photographer named Pete Souza. He has a few books out now about photographing the Obamas. He did have unprecedented access to the Obama family and the inner workings of Obama's administration. And he is an amazing photographer. He captured some really great moments. But he did have this unprecedented access. It's important to know that the general press pool at the time only had 6 photographers, and they were allowed into specific events. They didn't have the behind-the-scenes access that Souza had. But in this case, Souza's photos were heavily, heavily vetted. Every photo was poured over to make sure that what they were putting out was exactly the message the Obama administration wanted the public to see. Now, these photos were then released to the media digitally, and they could use them as press pool photos. But it's important to remember that these moments were very, very, very specific, and they put Obama in the best light. If he had Obama tripping, it's highly unlikely that they would have run that photo or distributed it. It's not just campaigns where a photojournalist might have intimate access, where you need to be quiet and stay out of the way. I had this opportunity to photograph a kidney transplant while I was working for the Times Standard. There was a kid in Arcata who had a genetic disease that he was born with and somehow survived. This would normally kill infants by the time they were 3 or 4 years old. Made it until he was old enough to get a kidney transplant, and I was allowed to be in the room. But there's a surgery going on, and not only was there a surgery going on, this was a teaching hospital. So the surgeons are busy not just performing the operation, they're teaching other surgeons how to do it. So I had to stay out of the way. I had to make sure, I wasn't tripping over stuff and, talking because they were busy. But what I would do is wait for the surgeons, the head surgeons, that is. I would wait for those surgeons when they stepped away or they had a third-year med student take over part of a procedure. They would step away, maybe get water or step to the side. And that's what I would ask them questions, make contact, and make sure that I knew what was happening during the procedure. I also made sure to get all of their contact information so that if I had follow-up questions, I could get that information from them. Because the story was not an immediate deadline, we were spending some time on it, I had the luxury of being able to call them the following day to get some follow-up questions. And it's just important to remember there are times when you've got to be in people's faces, but when you get intimate access to something like this, you need to pay attention to, proper protocol, stay out of the way, get your shots, and then get your information when you get your follow-up information by getting people's contact info. Covering meetings. When it comes to general news, right, if we look at the two differences between breaking news and general news is kind of the day in, day out, the regularly scheduled events. A big chunk of that for small town newspapers is covering meetings that directly impact the community. Large news organizations like the New York Times aren't going to cover school board meetings or city council meetings in an area like this. And as newspapers go out of business, there's a huge vacuum being created. So it's kind of important to keep that in mind as a journalist. But small town meetings still have a pull for the viewers, right? Breaking news will send people to a news site from social media because they want to know what happened. But what keeps people subscribing and paying attention to local news outlets is their coverage of these like meetings and general events, annual events that happen over and over again. So when you're at meetings, people are, not doing a lot of interesting things. One of the things we want to look for are people making visual expressions, right? If you're at a city council meeting, they're going to be sitting up at their little table. They're going to talk into their microphones. It's going to be pretty mundane. It is important to note that when you are getting facial expressions, make sure they're not accidental facial expressions. You want to look for people that are actually, that the expression is conveying the moment that's actually happening. When I worked for the Times Standard, there was a local real estate developer named Robin Arkley, and he is a very controversial figure. I was the photo editor, and I noticed that the photo they had, the file photo that they would use to run when there were stories about him, he looked very angry in the photo, and I thought it was not representative of how he was in public. So we went to a town hall meeting that he was having on a development that he was proposing for the balloon track, which is an area where the old railroad is down on the waterfront in Eureka. And I really spent a lot of time making sure I got a photo of him talking, looking professional, but not looking angry. And we ended up switching that photo out. They still use that photo as the file photo of Rob Arkley. Another thing to look for at meetings and events are props, people with signs, people holding things up. They add impact to the image, right? This is from a meeting on elderly dental health care, and you've got this woman. It's kind of a funny juxtaposition. You've got, this nice smile and the sign, but then you've got a woman who obviously has bad teeth. So it's important to, look for props, but not just props. Sometimes if the issue is before a city council that's controversial, you may have people who are highly emotional, and they'll show those emotions when they're speaking. So watch for those, right? We're looking for movement with the hands. We're looking for facial expressions. And also look at the crowd. Watch how the crowd is reacting, right? This is a shot where the person is not speaking during the meeting, but they're holding up a sign, and the photographer looked back to the crowd and saw this great moment. Um, and one other thing, when you're doing issues that may or may not have both strong support or strong opposition, or they may have a combination of both, it's important to get both sides. So if you go to a meeting at Eureka City Council, a very controversial topic here is the needle exchange. It's a nonprofit that's operated, but they do get some funding from the city. And there are people that are just absolutely adamant that this is the worst thing ever, that the reason there's needles all over the ground is because of the needle exchange. And there are other people that believe that this is a way to reduce harm and lower medical bills by providing people with clean syringes so they're not, getting abscesses and having to go to the emergency room all the time. But those people will become very vocal, and that's a time to kind of watch, or not just vocal, but animated and passionate. And that's a time to really watch for people and how they interact, especially kind of the person talking and the crowd that's got either the opposition or the support. So when covering meetings, make sure you're watching the crowd, watching the people that are seeing the meeting over, so the city council, or if it's on campus, the student government body, and then make sure you pay attention during the public comment to what people are talking about. Covering issues. So while there may not be specifically a news event, there may be an issue that's an ongoing issue. For those of you that don't know, the woman handing out food here is a woman by the name of Betty Chin. She's a local homeless advocate. She feeds a lot of people. She has a nonprofit. And the issue of homelessness is huge in not just California, but across the nation. So while there may not be a specific event, when we're covering an issue like this, we need to follow the actual action, right? So we did a story on how she needed to upgrade her truck for some new food codes. And we followed her whole process. We started with her and the volunteers that helped her prepare the meals, followed them through to the actual points where they drop off and distribute food, and then talked about the upcoming fundraiser to get her truck upgraded with the refrigeration and heating units that she needed to keep the food at the proper temperature. But again, you can have experts or even just talk to Betty Chin and get photos of her sitting in her office. Those aren't going to be visually compelling. You need to get people out in the field doing what it is that they're talking about. So experts are great to talk to for the written part of the story. But again, the issue part of it, the action that's happening out in the field is what we really want to focus on. All right. At any event that we go to, we really need to get caption information. So we need to get the information from our subject that's talking. We want to know the who, what, when, where, and why. That said, it can be difficult in large crowds, especially moving events. So things like parades and things like protest marches. While people are moving, it can be kind of hard to get them. But there's ways to kind of hedge your bet. Find breaks in the crowd. Find people that are stopping. You can set up at endpoints as a way to make sure that you find people, right? So if you have a march that's going from, let's say, Arcata High School about climate change, and they're going to assemble on the plaza, follow the march for a little bit, but then get down to the plaza and get people as they come in. So once they stop marching and start to set up where they're going to be for the speech at the plaza, you can go around and get the people's names that you've missed. When you're covering events, especially at protests and demonstrations now, you'll see a lot of people with their phones out. They're taking photos, they're taking video. Be respectful of that. Obviously, try not to get in their shots, but sometimes, you have to. I've definitely stepped on people's shots because they just happen to be where the action is. I try not to do it. But also, it's important to wait. So if you get a shot of somebody that is recording video or the recording part of the speech, you really want to wait and make sure that they're done and go back and get their name afterwards. This student was filming Charmaine Lawson speaking on the second anniversary of her son's murder on the HSU quad. So covering events in small areas like this, you will oftentimes see regular attendees, right? So this is at the same event. This is the second anniversary of Josiah Lawson's murder. And this is a local activist who has been to almost every one of these protests. So because this is a small community, I see these same people every time I go to an event. I actually use my notes program on my phone, and I have a picture of these kind of key players and their names so that I don't have to go and hassle them. Now, that said, if they make a specific point or they're calling for a specific action, I may still need to go and get follow-up information. But it's kind of insulting when I've been photographing these people once a month for practically 2 years to not remember their names. And personally, I'm bad with names. So this is just a way that I can expedite my process and my workflow by having these key players and having their names. I can actually like save myself some time. But it is important to remember that because I can go to one of these events and I know that there's going to be like these same 6 people, I can photograph them. I don't have to worry about getting their names. But if I continue to do that over and over again, the images are going to get stale. The viewers are going to realize, it's just going to get stagnant. So you do need to get new people, right? Some people graduate. Some people move on after the fall. There's new students involved. Some people may be joining the protest for a first time. So we need to make sure that we're mixing that up. Obviously, if Charmaine Lawson is at the event, you need to get Josiah's mother. But that said, we also need to make sure that we're not just getting the same 6 people over and over again. The images will definitely become stagnant. All right. So it's also important to not get complacent, especially if you work in a small area like this. Every year there's an event called the North Country Fair. It's a Saturday and Sunday on the plaza. It happens in September. And I shoot this thing every single year. So there's kind of some key players that are always in the Samba parade. And I also had an ace up my sleeve for covering the Samba parade because my friend's wife was one of the organizers for a long time. And so for the most part, if I couldn't get somebody's name during the parade because I couldn't get to him, I knew that she would be with some of the other organizers that were all, like there's different dance troupes that are involved. So she would be with all the other dance leaders getting a Bloody Mary at the Alibi. I could go in, take my laptop, show them the photos that I didn't have names for, and one of them would usually be able to identify it. These 2 people on the right with the little bells, those are the leaders of the whole parade. And I didn't recognize them, but I figured, oh, they're the leaders of the parade. My friend's wife will know who they are. I didn't want to bother them because they were leading the parade, but I did try to get to the end of the parade route to make sure that I got their names as the parade was ending. Unfortunately, I got stuck in the crowd, and I wasn't able to get to them. I lost them in the crowd. So I was very upset, but I thought I still have this ace in the hole. I'm going to go over to the Alibi, show this photo to my friend, and there's a couple others of the guy doing his thing. And I'm going to go over there and show them to these people and see if they can identify him. Well, unfortunately, my friend's wife was no longer involved. She wasn't even there, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Now, if you have a dance group, a larger group of people with maybe 10 or so folks in that shot, you'd get away with just naming the group and say that it's part of the Samba parade. But in this particular case, they were the band leaders, and they're very dominant in the shot. It's not like a big crowd shot. So I really needed to get their names. I was really upset with myself for losing contact with them, or visual contact with them, and letting them escape into the crowd because, I had gotten complacent. I thought, if I can't get their names, my friend's wife will know. And so I was kind of screwed. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I'm looking at my shots, trying to figure out anything. And here's a shot of the other band leader. And I'm like, I really want to use these shots. But man, I blew it. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I was pretty disappointed. It was on deadline. I emailed a few of the event organizers trying to get somebody to get back to me, but it's email. They're just at the end of this huge parade. I was really worried that I wasn't going to get my information before my deadline. And so I'd kind of given up hope when I was looking through my photos and I saw something in one of my shots that I thought might be able to help me. So take a close look at this and see if there's anything you can see in this shot that might help me figure out who this person is. If you don't see it, let's take a closer look. That, my friends, is a phone number. Now, I had to go through several shots of him with these bells to get the actual phone number. That last part is 7479. And what I ended up doing was sending a text with a photo of the two people, asking if they knew them, telling them that I was a journalist for the North Coast Journal, that I had taken photos of them, and I needed to know the name of the group they were with and their names. The person texted me back really quickly and said, I just want to make sure it's okay to give you their names. I'm going to contact them. But ultimately, they got back to me in about 20 minutes with both people's names, their proper spelling, and emails for them to be able to follow up with some questions. So I got lucky in this case. Really, really lucky. Again, when you're covering events in a small community and you kind of get to know who the folks are, it's important not to get complacent and think that you're just going to be able to ride by getting the photos of the people you already know. You do need to get not contact information, pardon me. You do need to get the names and the reason why people are at events. So keep that in mind when you're shooting in the field. All right. When we're covering events that are out in the field, some like protests and demonstrations, one of the things we really need to look for is reaction and emotion in our subjects. Anytime you go to a Josiah Lawson protest, there's going to be people hugging. There's going to be an emotional outpouring. Charmaine Lawson will most likely end up talking about her son and ultimately in tears. And so will other people. Some of the other people that actually get up and speak are severely impacted by this and are very upset. So when we're out in a situation where there may be reactions, there may be interactions, there may be emotions happening between our subjects, we really need to keep a close eye on that. One of the tips in the book is come early and stay late. I am a strong proponent of this. This is from the funeral and interment of the coffin of the Father Freed, who was murdered at St. Bernard's Church. I had been told by one of the people I knew that there was going to be a guy releasing doves, and then later we were told that he had some car problems and he might not make it. There's another thing to remember too, is especially when you're starting out, you may see some professional photojournalists out in the field, and you're like, oh, look at that, they're all over here. You also want to steer clear of the pack. What happens when you stick with the pack is you end up getting all of your images look similar to the other people that are shooting there. So you want to make sure that you're mixing it up. You want to make sure you're moving around the crowd. In this particular case, everyone was over at the casket. People were coming and putting their hands on it before it was going to get lowered into the ground. And almost every other one of the photographers that was there covering this, including some out-of-town journalists, were stuck over by the casket. And this guy shows up with a cage on the very, very edge of kind of where everyone's gathered and takes these doves out and lets them go. So at this point, I was still kind of waiting for him, but I thought that I had pretty much got all of the shots I needed, and I was just about to leave, but I thought I'll give myself 10 more minutes and wait and see if this guy shows up. There was only one other photographer that made it over to get this guy releasing the doves, and that was Sean Walker from the Times Standard, who just was looking around the crowd, saw this guy come up with a cage, and was able to make it over there. I just want to go back really quickly through establishing shots, medium shots, and detail shots. We talked about how there's an overall establishing shot, and in some cases that will be taken from up above, showing the whole crowd, right? This was a demonstration on the quad, and you can see the crowd isn't very filled in, but you can see it's the quad, and you can see that there's this big kind of, gathering up on the hill. The speakers are under the ledge there, but generally when there's an event on the quad, I will go up on that second balcony, the second floor balcony, and get a shot of the whole crowd. I'll also go to the back and climb up on stuff and shoot over the top towards the speaker, but you want to get a sense of size and scope. With that said, establishing shots don't always have to show the whole thing. So let's take a look at another shot that could easily be an establishing shot from the North Country Fair, right? It's not a whole huge bunch of the crowd, but you can tell that this is obviously some sort of parade slash performance. You can see some people in the background, and you can see a long line of dancers. So this would absolutely work for an establishing shot, especially for people in the community that have been to this event multiple times. They know when it's happening. They might have even been there, but this shot can absolutely say North Country Fair Samba Parade happened today. All right. Medium shots, those are the ones that are in a little tighter. They're going to have fewer people. I'm a big fan of mirrors and reflections. I really like the interaction between the face painter and the kid. We can see his face. This can be a hard shot to get both of them in it. Normally, you'll have to shoot from the side. But this is clearly a medium shot, right? We've got two primary subjects. There is a person's head you can see in the background. But we can see the kid's face in the mirror. We can see her smiling. He's smiling. It's a nice medium shot that gets the job done. There's always face painting at the North Country Fair. And again, another medium shot. This from, I think this was a protest over student rate hikes. This was taken on the plaza. I used a zoom lens to shoot the speakers who were speaking from the second story, from the balcony. And, you know, again, medium shot, we've got three people in the frame. We've got the one girl on the rule of thirds, but it doesn't show the whole crowd, right? So it's not overwhelming. We've got three very distinct subjects, and the person with the megaphone is a very vocal person at a lot of protests, an activist that's at a lot of things, especially relating to students. All right, we've got one more medium shot here again, this one with just a single person, but in this case I kind of framed them with banners, and they have a sign, so they're kind of holding up a prop. But again, it's a nice medium shot. It's one individual. They're holding a banner. I could have pulled back and got the second person, but I kind of liked the way this was framed and the look on their face. All right, so the last thing is detail shots, right? So getting in on close details, right? There's a hashtag Justice for Josiah. People follow it. That way they can see what's going on in events. So somebody had left these on one of the little rock outcroppings at the, or little cement retaining walls that are at the quad. So I used this close up as a detail, and we talked about how they had been using this Justice for Josiah hashtag for folks to follow up. To follow so that people could get more information. We have another detail shot here. This was a person who was handing out these flyers for a vigil that was coming up for Josiah Lawson. And again, I didn't actually have this person pose. We don't do that. They were just standing there asking people if they wanted flyers. They were handing them out. And so I just kind of shot from far away with my 70 to 200 and got really up close on their hands and this shot of the vigil flyer that they were handing out. And one last detail shot here. This is of two of the drummers that were marching in the Samba parade. And again, we don't have to just be super focused really, really tight, but this is still a detail shot. We can't see anybody's faces. We can't see anybody's like identifying information, but we do have a close-up of these two drums, and the drums are an integral part of the parade. They're what drive the beat for the people to dance. There's like whistles, drums, and those shaking bells that we saw with the two band leaders. Those are kind of the only musical instruments. So this is a way to kind of showcase like the importance of the drummers, pardon me, in this parade without having to, you know, identify the people, but really make the focus about the instruments themselves. So in conclusion, I'd like to just go through one other event and kind of visually show you how I would cover an event with overall, medium shots, and a detail shot, but also give you the breakdown on what I'm trying to do to show the scope of the event and cover it accurately for what it is and why it's newsworthy. This is an establishing shot of a two-part event. It was a cannabis cultivator and distributor and dispensary meet and greet. So this was an event put on by the local Humboldt County Growers Alliance that was designed to put both producers of cannabis and the purveyors of cannabis in the same room, and so that they could, meet, exchange information, and possibly build a client relationship. So the event was all day, but in two different locations. The first one was at the Adorney Center, and then there was kind of a party and a mixer that happened at the Inn at 2nd and C, which is also known as the historic Eagle House Hotel. And this is from the big ballroom, shot from the second floor. These are the tables that are set up during the second part of the event, and you can see that people are milling around, they're meeting with folks, and it kind of shows, this is how the event is set up. Now, the event also at this hotel had individual rooms rented by either distributors or producers, and people could go through and meet folks, check out their product, and hopefully make some new business connections. This is an interaction happening between a cannabis producer and a service provider. These people did testing, if I remember correctly. And so, again, this was not at the hotel. This is at the Adorney Center. But we're looking for people interacting. So this is a medium shot. We've got our two subjects. We've got the person pointing out the information in the brochure, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at the person, they look like they're pretty interested. So when I'm trying to cover these events, I'm really looking for the people to interact. And I'm really looking to get the idea that this is now a legal industry. And look, they've got a professional brochure. This isn't some backwoods operation anymore. They've got like displays. They've got things to go to trade shows. So there's kind of an underlying context by showing like kind of the glossiness that's happened. I was born and raised here, so the cannabis industry, sorry, that is an alarm for my battery backup going off. The cannabis industry used to be underground, and now it's above ground. You've got shiny marketing materials. You've got crazy packaging. So there's a little subtext here, but this is still a business. People are trying to network and make new connections and expand their business. It is a cannabis meet and greet, so I definitely have to have people showing off their product. This is a farmer, Humboldt Royal. They're showing a distributor from the LA area, one of their custom strains. They've got this like lighted magnifying glass that they're showing them. Oh, that is going to bother me. They've got a lighted magnifying glass. They're showing the client. You can see the person's down in there. They're smelling the weed. Everybody's happy. It's a big party at this point. And another medium shot that I have here, this is a person checking out some unprocessed cannabis. I don't remember if this was a distributor or a grower, but this is in one of the hotel rooms upstairs where they're having more private meetings with distributors and producers. So I wanted to make sure I've got people interacting again with cannabis so you know it's related to the event, but also kind of show a little more context. And last but not least, a little detail shot of a sample that a farmer brought to a extraction producer. They ultimately ended up making a deal based on this guy's sample. So I've got this detail here. We've got a small close-up on a sample jar of cannabis. But if you look in the background, it's out of focus, but there's a second jar that the person's checking. And of course, we've got the little rule of thirds going on with this jar. The center of that jar is pretty much right on the bottom lower third intersection. When we go out and shoot general news, we need to convey the size scope of the event. We need to get the people that are playing, not playing, we need to get the people that are participating in the event. We need to capture what it is that they're doing at the event and share that with our viewers. So I will see you folks on Thursday, and have a great day.